Heyo, welcome in to the Undrafted and Unqualified Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm Anthony and I'm here with Vinny once again. And we got another exciting episode today, kind of building off of what we did with values and busts the last two episodes. So, Vinny, go ahead and tell them what we're doing today.
Yeah, like Ant hinted at, this episode's a little similar to our values episode, but in this case, we're titling it Sleepers, because the qualifications for our picks were that they had to be outside the top 20 QBs, outside the top 36 RBs, outside the top 36 wide receivers, and outside the top 15 tight ends in terms of current ADP right now. So we're predicting that these people will finish above their ADP, but it's a more of a deeper look to names that you might not necessarily think about even drafting in some cases. So yeah, it was a cool kind of thing to dive deep into some of these names, and I think you'll be surprised about some like the stats that these guys are putting up being drafted so late.
Yeah, for sure. So no news today, which is good. We can hop right into it. So we'll start off with the QBs. Vinny, go ahead and tell us about your QB.
Yeah, so this was a guy that I was genuinely surprised about where he's going at in terms of ADP, and it's a name that like in terms of a sleeper, it's a pretty much a veteran and a kind of guy that's been around the NFL, a bunch of different teams for a while, and the guy I'm talking about is Geno Smith of the Las Vegas Raiders, quarterback of the Las Vegas Raiders, who currently has an ADP of 149 and is going about the QB 25. So the ADP of 149 is in a 10-team format. Going undrafted almost, or he is going undrafted.
Think round 13, 14, something like that.
Yeah, so one of the last rounds in a 10-team league. Um, and just to run down some of his stats from last year, this guy threw for 4,300 yards and finished as the QB 13, obviously in a different offense with the Seattle Seahawks. But, he was traded for a decent capital at his age and was given a 2-year deal worth 85.5 million. So I know QBs are paid a lot of money, but that's a lot of money invested into Geno Smith. And it kind of, I feel like, in my opinion, shows the trust they have in him to, produce in that 2-year period, and especially this upcoming year. Um, Obviously, he's clearly the starter. The depth room is very slim behind him. Um, and at the ADP of QB 25, the guys he's being drafted around are kind of in position battles. These are guys like Anthony Richardson, Daniel Jones around the same spot because of that's the same QB battle. And they are not the clear starter. And so Geno Smith is the clear starter being drafted around guys that don't even have a job locked up. And that was very surprising me to see just because of his production in the last 3 years. I mean, we've seen his resurgence produce some great fantasy numbers in with Seattle. His last 2 years before this included two top 20 finishes in fantasy, one of them being a top five finish where he was QB5 in 2022, which was kind of that year with, the whole they counted me out or they wrote me off, and how he
Yeah.
really just showed out and out of nowhere, and it was no one expected at all. But he's been able to continue some fantasy relevance from that time period, with the QB 13 finish last year. So top 20 fantasy finishes in his 3 years that he's been able to resurge. Um, and for me, the pick of being a sleeper is mostly based on the ADP, but you also got to love how the offense has significantly improved. The Raiders' offense has significantly improved. They obviously have Brock Bowers there, who's stud, best tight end in the league in a lot of people's minds, and certainly the best fantasy tight end. Just drafted Ashton Jeanty in the top 10. Jack Besh, also second or third round receiver, I believe. And then Jacoby Myers was there as well. So this offense has the weapons for Geno to kind of sling the ball around and continue to sling the ball around like he was doing in Seattle, where he's throwing for almost 4,000 yards every season. So the weapons are definitely there. Not to mention the Raiders are projected to be one of the top worst defenses in the league. So these are going to be a lot of games where Geno has to throw the ball and needs to score points to keep them in games. So I mean, this is about fantasy, and I'm not predicting the Raiders to be a good team by any means, but in order to stay competitive, which I'm guessing they want to do, based on the moves they've made, especially hiring Pete Carroll and Chip Kelly to the coaching staff, Chip Kelly being the offensive coordinator. They seem in a kind of mode to try and go out there and win football games. So I don't know, all things considered, and everything I kind of just went over, to hear that he's the QB 25 and sort of close to undrafted very much surprises me. And honestly, in terms of his skill set and just situation, I mean, this might sound crazy, but like I don't see much of a difference between the likes of like a Dak Prescott, the guy that can just sling the ball around, throw for a ton of yards and just hit guys in the end zone as much as possible. So that might be a bit of a stretch, and I see that, but like I don't see that much of a fall off. And this is the QB 25 we're talking about. So Geno Smith really surprised me as I did a deep dive, and yeah, this is my sleeper for QB right now.
Yeah. I saw you put Gino right before I put my guys in the dock, and I was shocked to see he's not top 20. Like, I was
Yeah.
like, wait, this guy isn't like QB 16, QB 17. Like, no,
Yeah.
he's going top 20, like QB 25. And most of these guys we're going to be looking at outside of the top 20 are guys you're going to want to look at in super flex, or two QB leagues, right? But no, like, I think Geno Smith is a guy you might want to consider as a backup quarterback in just a one quarterback league. Say you go ahead and you get a guy with a lot of upside, maybe a younger guy, maybe you're in on Justin Fields. You go ahead and get Justin Fields, but you may want to back him up with somebody who, you know, can have a steady floor if the Fields experiment doesn't work. So you go ahead and draft Geno Smith as your backup. I think that's a great pairing right there, for example. And I'm shocked to see that Geno, after finishing as high as QB 13, is QB 25, going around guys who don't even have the job secured. And then they not only drafted Jack Besh, but they drafted this kid out of Tennessee who's apparently like this massive wide receiver. He's like 6'5" or something like
Yeah.
that. Like Deontay Thornton, I think his name is.
Yeah, I've
And
heard of the name, yeah.
he's like a beast too. So they're just improving the offense is what they're
Hmm.
doing. And as you said, with the defense being bad, like they're gonna have to score. They're gonna have to throw the ball. So I
Hmm.
think Gino is quite overlooked right now. I wouldn't be surprised if his ADP rises a little over time. Nobody wants him because he's a boring pick. But he
Hmm.
goes from the Seahawks offense, which was run first, to now the Raiders offense. Yes, Pete Carroll is run first kind of guy, but they have all the weapons to pass as well. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity here for Gino. And yeah, I mean, consider him as a potential backup in your leagues. When we make
Yeah.
our rankings for quarterback, he's going to be a name to watch because I think both of us are going to have him higher than QB 25 for sure.
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, you were mentioning guys like Justin Fields. I'd honestly even be willing to pair him with a guy like Bo Nix, where like he's
Yep.
being drafted very highly, sixth, seventh round, I believe. We've talked about him before, but like rookie QBs, second year QBs have slumps from time to time. We saw it with CJ Stroud. I mean, I think Geno just gives you a good floor to have as a backup if a guy like Nix starts to fall into that slump. So yeah, I think it's definitely a guy worth drafting for sure.
Yeah, I'll be looking at him in my super flex league for sure. Is
Oh
that
yeah,
kind of
definitely.
QB3? I like to draft three QBs in super flex. So
You got it. You got it.
yeah, so I'll be looking at him. But before I mention my guy real quick, I really wanted to talk about JJ McCarthy. But within the time that we did the values and now we're doing the sleepers, he went from being outside the top 20 quarterbacks, so he wasn't a value when we did the values, to now he's at QB 20. So it kind of
Mm.
just he worked his way around our criteria so that he couldn't be talked about. But I think he's worth mentioning here because I think JJ McCarthy is a sleeper because Kevin
Mhm.
O'Connell knows how to produce QBs. Sam Darnold out of nowhere was extremely productive last year, and he managed to have a great season and got paid by Seattle. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what JJ McCarthy can do. He's young, he's super young, right? This was technically be his second year, but he didn't play last year, so this is kind of like his rookie year, first opportunity, and he has Justin Jefferson.
Yeah.
So, Kevin O'Connell not only made Darnold look good, but he's made Josh Dobbs look really good in the past. Nick Mullins has even produced. So, there's these guys who are nobodies and they're producing in this offense. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for McCarthy here. So he's currently sitting at QB 20. Just wanted to briefly talk about him. But for my actual sleeper, I went with Bryce Young. Bryce Young is currently going at pick 140 overall, which is late 12th round, 1208 at QB 24. So he's going even above Geno. He's one quarterback above Geno. Um, but I think Bryce Young, like looking down at some of these quarterbacks, you want guys who, have potential and have a real opportunity. Like I know I saw Tyler Show or however you say his name there. I don't really think he has an opportunity to be something in fantasy football. Maybe he'll produce for the Saints, and that's great. But for fantasy football, I don't really see it happening. Bryce Young, I can see it happening. Like first he started piecing it together in the last half of last year. And he just started turning up a lot. Like he quietly had 36 fantasy points in week 18, right? The week that
Wow.
doesn't matter. But still, regardless, 36 points. He had five total touchdowns. He
Mhm.
completed 25 of 34 passes, which, right, he was never this super accurate quarterback. That's great. 25 for 34, 251 yards and three touchdowns. And he also had 24 rushing yards and two touchdowns. So he had a great game here that's getting completely overlooked because it's not fantasy relevant. Um, and even some of those other games, yeah, 12, 14 points I know he had in that second half. It's still an improvement from what he was doing. He also had multiple 20-point games as well. And I know his rushing upside is a little bit capped because he just doesn't really run, but he can. And, if week 18 is any indication, those can be touchdowns too. Um, so that second half really started to turn things around. And he finished at QB 20 last year, so above where he's being drafted. And with that said, like, okay, he's being drafted QB 24, finished at QB 20 last year. He through week 7 of last year, he had about 14 total points. And he only started weeks 1 and 2, right? Then they benched him for Andy Dalton. And weeks 1 and 2, he combined for 11 points, about. So that's not great. That's an average of what, 5.5 points per week? Like that's terrible. So for him to have 14 total points through week 7 and then still finish at quarterback 20 with a second half resurgence, I think that's huge. I think that's sleeper potential right there. We want to look at those second half breakouts. And that's when things started coming together for him. Hopefully they can translate to this year. Um, He's also the offense is improving, right? They add Ted McMillan, who they drafted at what was it, pick 8 in this year's draft. Like he's
Yep.
a huge addition as a receiver for him. Hunter Renfrow they signed as well. So Hunter Renfrow coming back out of retirement, we saw him be extremely productive in Vegas. I don't expect him to be extremely productive here in Carolina, but that's another player that they added, right? They're trying to give him the weapons. Then they also have Xavier Legette and Jalen Coker going into year two. They were both rookies last year, and they each of them had some flashes here and there. And then Thielen's still somehow performing, right, at his old age. So they have a competent receiver room. It's not great, but there are some pieces there for him, and it's improving. So if that second half was an improvement for him, he started getting it together. Hopefully, he can do the same thing in this upcoming year. And then I just want to talk about that too with like some of the consistency, right? So not only could the offense grow, but the consistency of having Xavier Legette and Jalen Coker going into year two. That means it's year two with Bryce Young. Having Thielen still there, even if he doesn't produce, he's still a veteran in that locker room who's been there. He's gonna know how to show these guys around. Hunter Renfrow, right? The same coach, right? They're not going from coach to coach. Dave Canales is still their head coach. So I like some of that consistency for Bryce Young to continue building the rapport. And I think alongside of Geno Smith, those are two guys I really want to target in my Superflex league. Geno is okay, he's more of a floor guy, but I think Bryce is one of those upside guys I want to take a shot on. I'm not looking to go get Anthony Richardson or any of those guys. I'm gonna pull up. right here too. I'm gonna find who's going right around those quarterbacks because
Yeah.
I think you want the upside guys or Geno Smith who has the floor. Like other guys going around and Michael Penix is going above the two of them. We don't know what Penix is going to be at all. He had two games last year where he showed flashes, but it was against horrible defenses. One was against the Panthers, right? You have Sam Darnold going right after them, who I'm worried about going to Seattle. Cam Ward, right? What's he going to be? I again, nice upside pick, but we've seen Bryce Young produce a little bit. So I think that step, Anthony Richardson's going there. Rodgers, I don't want Rodgers. I don't think he has a floor like Geno Smith. Russell Wilson, Daniel Jones. Um, so some of those guys, a couple guys going ahead of him, Matthew Stafford, okay. Maybe because he has Devontae Adams now too. Tua at QB 21, Tua worries me. So,
Hmm.
I might be looking to get that upside or a guy I know has the floor instead. So, I think both these guys I'd prefer over some of those others going in that range. And I think, yeah, there are some good names well ahead of them, right? And maybe that's why they're being drafted so low. But
Hmm.
I think there's a lot of opportunity here for Bryce Young. And I'm not going to say, oh, I'm expecting him to be top 12 because I don't think he will. I just don't think the pieces are fully there for him. But I expect improvement and improvement from QB 20 last year. So even if it's QB 16, that's competent enough, especially in Superflex. So,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I feel like Bryce Young is an interesting one for me because I don't know if I'm necessarily targeting him in a non-superflex league
mm,
because even as a backup, like I feel like I would rather target a guy like Geno Smith
yep,
just because of the floor. But like you're right. I think a lot of the points that you made, the main one that stick out to me is that this team is consistently investing in him to be the
mhm,
starting quarterback with weapons to
yep,
keep providing for him. So like that is exciting to see. I mean, you don't use they've drafted a receiver in the first round or drafted a receiver in the first round, then drafted two wide receivers as you mentioned the year before. So like they're
yeah.
clearly you don't draft these guys for backup quarterbacks. So I mean, it's clear that they want Bryce Young to be the guy. He's going to have every chance to do it. So yeah, we'll see what he does with it. But yeah, the ADP is exciting in terms of like how that offense could break out as a whole.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you too. I think Gino could be a backup, whereas Bryce Young, you're shooting upside more for like a super flex. But that's also why I mentioned after you brought up Geno Smith, most of these guys after QB 20, you're only
Yeah,
looking at in super flex, except for Geno Smith,
exactly,
because Geno is
exactly.
one of those guys who has the floor. But yeah, don't forget also Bryce Young was the first overall pick 2 years ago.
Yeah, no, yeah, you're right.
He's going into year three after having nothing in year one. Year two, they benched him for some time, but he looks happy on the field. He got his confidence back. And not to mention, I'm just a Bryce Young guy too, because I know he's always talking about God, always talking about like being happy, looking out for people. I know I saw a clip of him asking the media in his press conference, like, "Oh, how are you guys? I know nobody ever asks you guys. You always ask how we're doing." And it's just,
Yeah,
look, I love Bryce, but I think the pieces are there for him too, which I'm hoping it comes together for him. So
yeah, I think it definitely
yeah,
could, and like I'm rooting for him too. Like it's a guy that he got torn to shreds by everyone because he was pretty bad in his first year,
yeah,
but that second half is exciting to see a quick turnaround, hopefully. So yeah.
yep, super flex, target him. Let's get into running backs here. Vinny, I like your guy, so why don't you take it away and talk about him?
Yeah, yeah. Before I get into it, I mean, I think we talked about it a little bit, just you and me before we started, but like running back was interesting because, when we get into sleepers past the top 36 running backs, it's a lot of guys that are backups, and are really dependent on a big time injury to a primary starter. And to me, that just didn't feel right to like pick a sleeper, like, oh, if, this guy gets hurt, then, oh, he's an RB1. Like, of course, that happens in fantasy, but it's impossible to predict injuries and just kind of straight up wrong to predict injuries. So I went the route of kind of trying to find a guy that had a solid floor with a potential running mate. And if that person did go down, this guy has legitimate RB1 upside. So the guy I went with was Rashad White of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now, I know when people hear that name, the Bucky Irving fan club has just gotten out of control, rightfully so. The guy's an amazing football player. But I think by a lot of fantasy managers, this has been determined as Bucky Irving's team in terms of the running back touches and where that's all going to go.
Yep.
But I'm going to throw out a few stats to kind of ease that back a little bit in terms of what value Rashad White could hold alongside Bucky Irving this upcoming year. So in weeks 10 to 17, which I think a lot of people would consider Bucky's kind of breakout period in which he kind of took over that role as the starter. Rashad White still averaged about 14 touches per game and close to 70 total yards per game, which was good for the RB 18 in fantasy points per game. Um, ended up finishing as the RB 24 overall, which was kind of heightened by some early, early season finishes where he was the starter and getting a majority of the touches. But that's still a low RB2 showing for a guy that in many cases lost his job halfway through the season in a lot of people's minds. He's obviously very capable in the past. He's had an RB7 finish in 2023. So when he gets those full-time touches, he's productive. I wouldn't say efficient. That's kind of been his issue, and that kind of the main reason that Bucky kind of took everything over. But the main thing in fantasy for running backs is as long as you're getting touches, you have the chance to put up fantasy points. So there's a lot of guys that they aren't very efficient, but good fantasy players. Um, but yeah, I mean, another point that this isn't trying to turn this into a Bucky Irving kind of hate session, but I'm not necessarily sold at even Bucky Irving's ADP in terms of is he worth that? I mean, I looked into it a little deeper. Bucky Irving in college, he played at Oregon, I believe, he had 2 games in which he surpassed 20 carries. That really shocked me because when you look at these bell cow running backs that are coming out of college, they're just getting the ball every time. It's a run heavy college offense. They're scoring like they're getting the ball 40 times a game. He only did that twice. He got 20 carries. So, people are drafting him. I don't know his ADP currently. I don't know if you want to check that out and quickly for me, but like he's being drafted in the top 10 running backs, I can say for certain, I believe. And these are guys that have been shown to be able to handle bell cow like workloads of getting 20 plus carries a game. Bucky hasn't really shown he's been able to do that yet. So I'm not convinced they're just going to automatically give this guy 20 carries a game. And I think Rashad White still has potential to be involved within the run game. And we obviously also know his abilities in terms of receiving the football. Um, a couple stats on that. Where is it? He finished in the top 8 or top 10 of running backs in both receptions, targets, and receiving yards for running backs. So that floor of receiving work that he can pop in on third downs and also get the rushing work alongside a top 10 drafted fantasy running back really kind of excites me to draft as kind of a bench stash that could sneak into flex value on a weekly basis. And like I mentioned in the beginning, if Bucky unfortunately ever goes down, this is a guy that, could win you a league if you have him on your bench. So yeah, Rashad White is who I went with here.
Yeah, I love it because I think, as you said, he has standalone value, right? And I think so Bucky, I have it pulled up here. Bucky is going at the RB9, 22 overall. So that's late second. Like he is going really early, and you can
Yep.
get Rashad White at what pick did you say he's at?
Oh,
139, which
I didn't mention it. Yeah.
that's late 12th. You can get him 10 rounds later. And and like you said, like he's a PPR guy. He was not like we saw Bucky kind of take over last year. And he still finished at what you said, RB 24.
Yep.
Like
Yep.
so you're telling me he's going 20 running backs later because this is Bucky's team now? I don't agree with that at all.
Yeah.
And I think Rashad White has a lot of value on his own. I will say you are right. He is a very inefficient rusher. So that volume will never come for him. I think Bucky is going to rush for this team primarily because he is a great running back. But
Yep,
where he's going is kind of crazy.
it
Um,
is.
and as you were talking about this too, like I think I might be out on Bucky that high, and I'm definitely in on Rashad White. And I'm also going to pull up the stats here for you real quick to just boost Rashad White even more. And because in PPR, you want running backs who can catch the ball. Okay.
Hmm.
2022 was his rookie year. He had an 86.2% catch rate. 2023, he had a 91.4% catch rate. It's like, oh my God, this is a fluke. Like, what? This guy's just catching everything. 2024, 89.5% catch rate. This guy can catch the ball. He has great hands out of the backfield. And
Yep.
Baker is dumping down the ball and putting it in the spot he needs to be. So it's like a combination of the two of them. Maybe it's the plays they're drawing up as well, but he's an elite pass catching running back, and I don't think that's talked about enough. And where he's going right now at running back 44, like we know Bucky's the lead back here, but we know Rashad White has standalone value as a pass catching running back, and I think he's going to be really valuable. He could be a flex on a lot of
Oh,
weeks.
yeah.
So it's like, don't overlook this guy at all. Like Vinny brought up a guy for you here. This is a gem. This is the kind of guy we like on a sleepers episode.
Yeah, no, it was because, like I said, a lot of running backs around that range. I think you like picked a similar guy to this that like could have some standalone value.
Mhm.
Um, but like y- it's difficult to predict a backup, and this guy is a backup by, I guess, the definition of it. But like we mentioned, he's gonna get in the game, and this is an elite offense the Buccaneers have and have produced the past 3 years. So they're gonna score a lot of points, and that means touchdowns, yards, receptions, everything. So as if you're a running back that's gonna get touches in that system, I want you to be on my fantasy team,
Yep.
no matter if you're the starter or not. So yeah.
Yeah, completely agree. Just before I talk about my guy, another guy I think as a backup who might have value is Isaac Guerendo. We know there's always a chance CMC can go down, right? We don't want to bank on injuries, as Vinny said, but I think Guerendo could have some standalone value as well. But I decided to go a different route, and I want to talk about Ramondre Stevenson, whose ADP is currently 123rd overall, which is good for early 11th round. He's going as the RB 39 off the board. So to talk about some of his finishes, right? He finished at RB 28 last year, and even in only 12 games the year before in 2023, he finished at RB 35, which is still higher than where he's being drafted right now. And I know this was, oh, it's because it was his backfield and everything. I understand that, but I still think it's a little absurd that he's going quite a bit later than where he's been finishing lately when, Antonio Gibson they were mixing into the fold last year into that backfield. He also won't repeat this and never will, but he has a track record. He finished at RB7 in 2022. So that's good for RB1 overall. I remember we were talking about drafting him in like the early second round or something like that going into 2023. Um, and also, this offense is on its way up, right? It's in for a major improvement here. There's new coaching with Mike Vrabel and offensive coordinator and Josh McDaniels, who's also been with the Patriots before and has produced. He's produced not only quarterbacks, but running backs as well. So I think this offense is going to right the ship. May's going into year two. There's a lot of huge talks about May being a great quarterback, and his tape looked good last year. There's wide receiver improvement, not only through the draft, but bringing in Stephon Diggs, the O-line, they improved in the draft and through free agency. So there's a lot to like. And if this offense improves, that means more touchdowns, which I could see going Stevenson's way as kind of that rushing, that running back at the goal line. The one knock I will say, Stevenson has serious fumbling issues, and the guy they drafted in Travion Henderson's not only explosive, but he does not fumble the ball. And I understand why then that makes everybody say, oh, Henderson's going to be the guy there. They're going to give him the rock right away. I kind of don't see it that way. I kind of expect Ramondre Stevenson to be more of kind of that 1-2 down guy, and Henderson more mixes in. But I really see this being kind of a split backfield, at least to start. And I know he's going to be on a short leash. If he continues to fumble, Ramondre Stevenson, that I am worried about that, and I think he's not a sleeper then if he continues to fumble because Henderson will take over completely. But Henderson's being drafted really high. He's being drafted at the RB 22, which is 17 spots higher than Stevenson. And truthfully, we don't know who the lead back is going to be. So with that being said, it also brings me into another point I want to bring up, which is later round running backs you want to target when they're in an ambiguous backfield. So you don't know who the clear number one guy is. For example, last year, the Panthers, it was Jonathan Brooks and Chuba Hubbard. Where was Chuba Hubbard going? He was going like real late, running back 40s probably turned out to be great, So that's just one example of why you want to target guys in ambiguous backfields. So I really think this is more of an ambiguous backfield than people make it out to be. I know the draft capital is there for Henderson, but I don't think we can say, oh my God, this guy's going to come in and produce and take over completely when Stevenson has a track record of being good. As long as he doesn't fumble. But I think I want to bring up just a few other names real quick about like those ambiguous backfields too, and guys you could also think about targeting. Javonte Williams and Jaden Blue, the two guys for the Cowboys, are going at RB 38 and RB 42. You don't know who the one's going to be, but consider it this way, right? Say you draft Derrick Henry, you know he's the running back one for the Ravens. You're drafting him at his price tag because you know he's the guy and he's going as a top 10 running back. Well, one of these guys could produce and be the guy, like Javonte Williams or Jaden Blue, Ramondre Stevenson or Travion Henderson. But you get a major discount when you draft a guy where you don't know who the true one is. And sometimes it's split, but sometimes they can still produce. Other times they take over completely, like Hubbard did last year. And I know Brooks was injured, but you take a shot on these guys, Javonte Williams, Jaden Blue. One of those guys might end up panning out, and they'll finish well above RB 38 or 42. Then you have the Jaguars backfield. ETN, Bashal Tutin, and Tank Bigsby are going RB 37, RB 40, and RB 50, right? Maybe you want to take a shot on Bigsby because you like Bigsby as a rusher. RB 50 is extremely low. And I know this is a three-headed backfield, right? And you don't know who the guy is going to be. But again, all of them are discounted for where one of them will probably finish. And then for Denver, you have J.K. Dobbins, who they just brought in, and that means they're not set with R.J. Harvey being the guy, the only guy there. I still like Harvey. I still think Harvey's good for where he's going, but Dobbins is going as the RB 46. And this is again, we don't know what this backfield looks like. So maybe take a shot on J.K. Dobbins. And we know running backs can produce in a Sean Payton offense. So there's a chance Dobbins finishes higher than where he's being going. So again, Ramondre Stevenson's kind of my guy. I like him here because I think he's going just so much later than Travion Henderson. I think he's being discounted too much. If he's going, low 30 or low 30s, like 31, 32 at running back, I think that's where I'd be like, okay, maybe I'm not gonna take a shot on him. He's a boring pick, but I think he could be really productive for RB 39. And that's where you're starting to see these backups or these guys that you're like, there's not much for him here. I think there is something for Stevenson. And if you don't get those top end guys, you don't have a lot of running backs and you need a third running back or something. Stevenson's going to be a good pick here. And like I said, ambiguous backfields, always look to target them later in drafts.
Yeah, no, I mean, first of all, I do like the Stevenson pick as a sleeper a lot, but I also like even more the point that you made about like how much speculation is used in fa by fantasy drafters and players overall. I mean, at the end of the day, all of us are relying on the same reports that these beat writers and people at the fields and practice and coaches as much as they're giving us, but no one truly knows what's going to happen until it's out there and they're playing the football games,
Right.
So I would even go as far as like you mentioned some of these backfields that like are a little more ambiguous, but I would even go as far as, people talking about Hampton, who I really like, but those first few weeks, even 5, 6 weeks, I think Najee Harris is going to get a lot of the touches. You could
Yeah.
even go with the Browns and Quinshawn Judkins. People
That's
are penciling these guys in as like these guys that are the guys that are going to get all the touches, well, they drafted Dylan Sampson 2 rounds behind him, who you could argue had a better college production than Quinshawn Judkins did. And he's very talented as well. They still have Jerome Ford there. So I think it's a really good point to not just jump on these, rookies that who very well could produce in the latter half of the year. But those first 8 weeks in your fantasy season are very important. Like if you don't
Yeah.
have a running back that you spent a third or fourth round pick on available to do what you spent that third or fourth round pick on, you could be 2-6, 1-7, 3-5, and all of a sudden you're scratching, hoping these guys are the next CMC that they need to carry you back. So
Yeah.
I think it's a great point to say that you got to be careful of where you're drafting these guys, but also eat up on the guys that are part of that committee potentially at the beginning of the season that could win you a few weeks early on that do matter a lot.
Right. Yeah. Just because you mentioned Dylan Sampson, he's going undrafted, RB 62, right? I know Jerome Ford's there too, so it's not like the most exciting. Browns,
No.
they're not super exciting, but Najee Harris is going at RB 34. So he's just making that cutoff for us. And then you have a Marion Hampton going 50th overall at RB 15. So
Yeah.
50th is what? Early fifth round. And I know that like everything that's been coming out, I shouldn't say I know because I'm not Jim Harbaugh, but
Yeah.
everything that's been coming out is this offense is going to be split. And I wouldn't be surprised if a Marion Hampton really takes over towards the end of the year. But like you just said, like you're spending up an early fifth to draft
Mhm.
Hampton when you could just get Najee later down the line and have
Yep.
very similar production. I actually really like Najee as a pick this year because I think he's going to produce at least for the first half and he's going to be productive and have a floor. So, again, that's a type of ambiguous backfield where it's kind of the inverse. Target the ambiguous backfields late, but if it's an ambiguous backfield, don't spend up on him. So in
Yep.
this case, don't spend up on Hampton, right? He
Yep.
could be amazing, but don't do it. You're missing out on other guys around that area who are going to produce. Kamara's going after Hampton. And we
Yep.
know Kamara is the only guy in that same
Yeah.
offense and a PPR guy. So it's like,
I think it depends on your team build. Like if you have
definitely.
you're sitting at early fifth and you drafted 4 studs that like are going to produce fantasy points and you have 2 running backs ready. All right, go get a Marion Hampton. But because
Yeah.
he could very well win you a league. But like you mentioned, I think people sometimes get too focused on like, oh, this guy's going to be a league winner. Well, in order to win a league, you have to get to the playoffs. In those
Yeah.
first 8 weeks where he might not have that role you're dreaming of, that could hurt you. So I think people need to focus on guys that are going to help them get to those fantasy playoffs that can produce these league winners and really see the whole thing out. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's easy to just get lost in all that.
Yeah, for sure. Let's move on to receivers here. Why don't you tell us about yours?
Yeah, this I'll just get into the name, but this was the guy that these stats are shocked me and I think they'll shock you and everyone else. So I went with Marvin Mims of the Denver Broncos. He's going into his third year with the team. He was a second round pick in 2023. And really in 2022 or excuse me, 2023, he was more of a special teams guy and he's very elite at special teams, not to mention he has 2 Pro Bowl appearances and 1 All-Pro appearance list as a punt returner last year. So he's very elite at that. But second half of the last year, we really started to see him produce at the receiver position, which of course he was drafted at. From week 11 to week 18, he averaged 62 receiving yards per game and led all receivers in yards per route run at 3.63. And you didn't mishear that. That was all receivers. And that's a stat that not nerds of fantasy football, but people really value yards per route run. I mean, it shows how efficient you can be when you're on the field and people are throwing you the ball. So he led from in those 8 weeks, he was over the likes of Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson in terms of efficiency and yards
Yeah.
per route run, which is ridiculous. But it gets better. He had a 28% target share during that period per route run, which was 13th in the NFL. And fantasy points in per target and per route run are both second in the league during that span. So this guy, when he got the chance to get the ball in his hands, he was not only good, but he was elite. Like, I mean, he was among names that are being drafted in the first round. So, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying he will return that value, but it kind of shows how much of a difference maker he can be when given the opportunity. The last stat I'll get into, just because it was so shocking to me, again, he had 470, or excuse me, he had 503 receiving yards total last year. 477 of them were after the catch, which is just
Ooh.
95% of his receiving yards were after the catch. So these are just some outrageous numbers to me that it almost seems like I'm making them up, but I promise you I'm not. To dive a little deeper into the current situation he's involved in, Cortland Sutton is there. Had a great year last year with Bo Nix. Other than that, they really didn't invest in the receiver position besides drafting Pat Bryant in the third round, who by a lot of people thought should go undrafted. So this isn't like an elite receiving prospect we're talking about. Sean Payton has talked him up a little bit, but this isn't an elite prospect that like is going to be demanding a lot of competition. They did bring in Evan Ingram, but he plays tight end. It's still a part of the receiving room, but it's not going to get in the way of Marvin Mims getting on the field. So I think that Marvin Mims could realistically, like we just talked about the running backs, we don't know what's going to happen, but I think we could realistically seeing him lining up as wide receiver two next to Cortland Sutton on a regular basis, and kind of see what he can do given that shot that he really only got from week 11 on. So I'm really excited to him. And then one quote I just saw with Sean Payton, I won't read it verbatim, but he spoke specifically about Mims and said, he took blame for not getting him on the field as a receiver earlier than week 11 because he was almost non-existent to that point.
Yeah.
So I think it shows you, Sean Payton has been known as an offensive genius. And if this guy's talking about you and saying like, this is my fault, this guy's going to play more, he's going to play more. And those just elite numbers that are shocking. I'm really excited to see in a full workload with year two of Bo Nix.
Yeah. Um, I read the name before you brought him up. That's all I did. I read the name.
Yeah.
And I was like, Marvin Mims, why the hell are we talking about Marvin Mims here? And then I'm seeing all the stats you bring up, and I recently saw something, there's been a lot of talks about Devon Vele or whatever his name is, being that number two guy in the receiving room. Um, but, I also saw a post recently doing like fact or fiction. It was like Upper Hand Fantasy on Instagram. They were saying that that's fiction. They're like, that's not one of the things that's going to happen. And you talking about Mims here, I'm like, oh, well, I can see why. And this makes a lot of sense for Mims to be the number two guy here. I don't think Pat Bryant's going to have a role. I don't think, Troy Franklin was maybe a fourth round pick for them last year. He didn't
Yeah.
have a role. Um, I, they're going to go with the guy who's good. And I think that it makes a lot of sense that Mims kind of takes over that number two role. And maybe other guys mix in, but these are impressive, impressive stats. And yeah, I may be taking some shots on Mims moving forward as kind of a sleeper. I'm kind of
Yeah.
curious though, how'd you find him? Like you just see the name, you're like, oh, I'm not gonna talk about Marvin Mims. So like how'd you decide like, oh, I'm talking about this guy because he's got six stats?
Honestly, similar to you, well, not you were talking about how the kind of Devon Vele news of like this is he going to be the guy, but I have seen some other, dynasty nerds. I'll shout them out really quick. They talked
Okay.
about Marvin Mims as kind of being a dynasty buy right now in terms of like return on your value, and it kind of just made me think a little deeper in terms of like why they talked about why to buy this guy, but I was like you said, Marvin Mims, like
Yeah, why
really is this
not?
guy going to be relevant? But then I kind of saw some of these stats and like how efficient he is when he gets the ball in his hands. And he is a gadget type too. He has speed. He can get the touches in the backfield, rushing the ball, and he has punt return value, and he can house a kick that gets you 6 points. Like this guy is just kind of a super exciting player to watch, and when he's on the field, he produces. So
Yeah.
that's kind of how I came about him is, through Dynasty Nerds. And I obviously knew the name, but And then quickly, I don't think I mentioned where he's at in ADP. He's an ADP of 126 currently. So early or mid 12th round, early late
To make
13th in
that.
some formats, but wide receiver 60. So I mean, if you're looking for a budget wide receiver that could return your value, like right now this year, you have to spend a pick to get those good wide receivers. This guy could be it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he was really explosive. I'm looking at his college too, right? He played in
Oh yeah.
Oklahoma, so it's not like he played, at some bum college either. Like this dude was really explosive.
Second round pick too. So like they have the capital invested in him.
Right.
So yeah.
Yeah, and before I talk about my guy too, like these, you're gonna hit a point where you're like, wow, these guys are just not intriguing at the receiver position. You're gonna see guys like Thielen where you probably don't want him because his upside is really capped. Um,
hmm
so Mims is a guy you might want to go after. I know I was thinking about Kyle Williams for the Patriots. That's a guy you might want to go after. These younger guys who could really boom and create a role. Like Mims could create a role, getting that wide receiver two role. So I'm going to talk about a guy who could get that wide receiver two role right out the gate as a rookie, and that's Trey Harris with the Los Angeles Chargers. Currently, his ADP is at 101, which is about round nine, pick five, wide receiver 52. So he's getting drafted. Um, it sounds crazy, right? Wide receiver 52, and he's going in the ninth round. But, at some point, you're going to have to spend up a little bit. But that's a guy I'm really excited about. He's going above Mims. So Mims maybe was more of a dart throw later down your board. Trey Harris, you will have to spend up. He is a little bit more known of a name, especially because he's a rookie. The rookies are always exciting. But he's a big dude. This guy's a big dude. He's going to play on the outside right away. Lad's a slot guy, right? And this guy, Trey Harris, he's 6'3", 210. Like he's a big guy. So he's making plays already at OTAs, and he talked up Justin Herbert a lot about his ball placement just being in the exact spot. He's like, every time it's such a pretty ball, and I'm going to catch it every time. So he's super confident with Herbert as his QB, and he talked up the coaching a little bit, especially the wide receiver coach. He's like, they know what they're doing. So he's really confident going into this year, and that's great to hear from a rookie. And it's great to see he's already building good rapport with his quarterback, who is a great quarterback, by the way. And I kind of expect him to step in right away as the next man up to Lad McConkey. I love where Lad's going at like wide receiver 13, somewhere around there, but that's early. Like you could get maybe the wide receiver one potentially just because he's on the outside versus Lada in the slot. And you're getting this guy as a rookie way later in the ninth round. So I think at wide receiver 52, it's kind of a steal. I know this offense is a run first offense, but Harris is going to get a lot of looks. And it feels kind of like what they were hoping to get out of Quentin Johnston, but we know Harris can actually catch the ball. So, that helps out. And but even still, like Quentin Johnston last year was very productive. He finished at wide receiver 39 and had 8 touchdowns. So they still find a way to make sure these guys are catching touchdowns, catching the ball. And maybe Quentin Johnston's the other guy on the outside with Trey Harris, but I kind of expect Herbert to look Harris's way a lot more. He didn't have other options to look at last year besides Lad McConkey. So now he has Trey Harris to look at. And rookie receivers are always great to target in drafts. And this is a great spot to go ahead and get him because they spent the draft capital on him, but he's going a lot later than you might think a guy with that draft capital could go. And he was also very productive and polished in college, and he's continuing, that's translating into OTAs right now. So I'm really excited for this guy. I like the landing spot of the Chargers too, and I'm excited to see where this guy goes. If people are reaching on him, I might not get a share of him, but he's still a guy I'm looking to target late in drafts.
Yeah, no, I like this one a lot. I think it's easy to miss guys like this when the early round receivers, for example, Travis Hunter, Ted McMillan, kind of get a lot of that love in terms of early draft value. But it's easy. These guys, there's gonna be out of like Trey Harris, Kyle Williams, Matthew Golden, Jack Besh, Luther Burton, like a couple of those guys are gonna skyrocket and really be guys you're looking at next year, like we are looking at now, Vlad McConkey, Brian Thomas. It's just gonna happen. You just have to pick the right one. And I like this a lot. I like Trey Harris as one of those guys potentially, just because of the elite offense, like you mentioned. Like this is a growing offense with a stud with Justin Herbert. So yeah, I think that's the theme, honestly, with a lot of these picks is like when you invest in elite offenses, you're gonna get return on fantasy points. So yeah, I like it a
That,
lot.
that's a great point to bring up. You go ahead and get a guy in a good offense, and
Mhm,
usually they'll return value. And I think too, you mentioned a couple of the other names, but like Luther Burden, we don't know what his role is, and he's going similarly.
mhm.
Even Matthew Golden, the draft cap was there. He could very well be the wide receiver one, but he's going higher. He's going, I think, around like wide receiver 40, which is
I think you're right. Yeah.
pretty high. And, we don't know what that guy's role is going to be. Whereas Trey Harris has a wide open path. It's really clear he's going to start right on the
Mm.
outside. And I think that's the kind of guy where his role is basically solidified already just because it's so open. And I think that's where it's like, okay, go ahead and get that guy, spend up on him and draft the rookie who could produce. It reminds me a little bit of Brian Thomas Jr. I'm not going to lie to you. Brian
Mm.
Thomas Jr., big-bodied receiver, wide open receiving room last year, and he gets put there. And even with Mac Jones at quarterback for part of the year, he still produced at an elite clip to the point he's going as a top 10 wide receiver this year. So
Yeah.
Trey Harris is a guy I'm going to be looking at in every draft as long as he's other people aren't reaching on him because I don't want to spend up too much. But
I think to also just quickly point out in terms of Lad, like love Lad. I think we both are really high on Lad, but um he does have his downsides in terms of like his abilities of what he's able to do on a football field. He's not a burner. He won't burn you down the field for a deep shot. He can, but that's not his game. So I think there are spots for Trey Harris to kind of shine in areas that Lad can. I think they'll complement each other really well.
I would agree. We're running a little low on time, so let's try and do tight ends somewhat quickly here.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
make sure you talk your points, but let's hop right into that.
Yeah, I'll get right into it. My tight end sleeper is Brendan Strain of the Jacksonville Jaguars, going at an ADP of 166. So that's undrafted in a 10-team format, just about, I believe.
Yeah.
Maybe a last round pick, but that's good for tight end 19. This guy's the tight end room is wide open in Jacksonville, and I think this guy will clearly be the starter. He was a second round pick in 2023. And Evan Ingram has obviously been the guy there for the past few seasons, and we've talked about how we like Ingram a lot on the Broncos now. But like I just said, he's on the Broncos now, so those targets have to go somewhere. Obviously, they draft Travis Hunter, have Brian Thomas, so this isn't going to be a guy with elite production and top five upside. But in the time that Ingram did miss games last year, in which Strange was the top tight end, he averaged about 4 reception and 35 receiving yards per game. That's good for about 8 points per game, which when you're streaming a tight end and you're in that kind of hell of trying to find a week to week tight end that can produce, 8 points is not awful, especially for the kind of rut the tight end position turns into after the top five. So that kind of production he showed when he was starting tight end is encouraging. But the last point I'll say is, like we mentioned, you want to invest in good offenses. Liam Cohen's the coach there now, fantastic offensive coordinator of the Tampa Bay Bucks. Trevor Lawrence is there, two stud receivers. Running back room is pretty crowded, but a lot of talent there. This is going to be a good offense, and he's going to be the starting tight end for them. So he's going to be on the field a lot. Also, a very good blocker. He's going to be on the field as much as possible. There's really no downsides to his game. There's also really no elite sides to his game. So this is a little bit of a boring pick, but I think he has potential to sneak into that top 15, potentially push top 10. I don't know, but that kind of gets fluky around the top 10, end of the top 10. So Brent Strange is the guy I went with.
Yeah, with these late round tight ends, I like this pick. These late round tight ends, you want to take a shot at a guy with upside because we know tight end is such a shallow position. If you take a guy with, maybe a floor, but his upside is completely capped, maybe you're capping out at that 8 points as like a ceiling. But
Yeah.
Brendan Strange could improve this year. And, that was without touchdowns, was kind of that 8 point
hmm
threshold
hmm
for him. So I like that pick a lot. I think that's a good shout. Jake Ferguson, Dallas Goedert, Kyle Pitts, those guys are going a little bit before him. And I was tempted to do Pitts, but yeah, we haven't seen it. His upside is capped at this point, unfortunately. And he's dealing with an injury. And that's kind of the big thing as to why I was like, all right, well, not going to
It's
be an
cra
injured player.
it's
But
crazy that we're almost considering him a sleeper at this point
yeah,
when he was the best tight end prospect in history, but
it
whatever.
is. But yeah, you want to shoot on guys with upside. With
Yep.
that being said, I almost went with Terrence Ferguson, the rookie for the Rams. I'm hearing a lot of buzz. He's going to be the third guy in that offense, and it's going to be
Mhm.
Puka, Devontae Adams, and then Terrence Ferguson. He's going completely undrafted, like tight end 30, which is crazy. Um, I didn't go with him though. I didn't want to kind of go against my hot take of tight ends finishing as a top 10 rookie tight ends. Um, but I think rookie tight ends, if you are going late, they're guys with upside. Like I just said, you want to take those guys with upside. Another guy with surprising upside, the guy I'm going with is Zach Ertz. He's currently going undrafted at the tight end 22. He finished as a tight end 7 last year. He had 66 catches on 91 targets for 654 yards and 7 touchdowns. He's 34 years old. That's pretty damn good for how old he is. He's not exciting. We know this, but he's constantly going lower than where he's finishing. He stayed healthy last year, and as long as he does that again, I expect him to still be a focal point of this offense, right? Who it's always, oh, who's the wide receiver two? Who's the wide receiver two? Well, it's Deebo Samuel now, but he looks really slow at OTAs. I don't know if you've seen the clip of him, but he looks really slow and bigger than he used to be. He does not look great. I kind of expect Ertz to still be the second option behind Terry, as old as he is. Um,
Mm.
over the course of last year, his targets per game increased, and as like more rapport was built with Jaden Daniels, and his touchdowns mostly came from that second half. So again, second half, we're looking at, that kind of rapport being built, and I expect that to carry over at least a little bit. I don't expect the touchdowns to stay as consistent, but that's a good sign. His snap percentage also increased a bit, and we started seeing him get closer to the 70 to 80% rather than low 60s he saw early in the season. And the important piece to mention about that snap percentage, he gets utilized a lot in big games. He played 80% of snaps in the NFC Championship against the Eagles. I think that's really important to note because he is 34 years old, but they're not taking him off the field. And that was a blowout. I know it's playoffs. You play the starters the whole time. I don't care. That was a blowout. And they utilized Zach Ertz because they want him on the field. Um, the worry with Ertz is the health along with the age, right? And Ben Sinnott, who was drafted early second round by the Commanders last year, and he's only 23 years old. So it feels a little bit similar to the Trey McBride situation, which was also with Zach Ertz. But you know, I don't know. I don't really buy into Sinnott being as elite as Trey McBride is. And I still think Ertz is going to produce, and I expect him to get the bulk of the snaps at tight end, even if he doesn't play the whole season after a tight end 7 finish and going undrafted. It's too low. Tight end 22 is way too low. I would look at him a lot closer to tight end 15 area, right? So somewhere around there, a Hunter Henry, a Dallas Goedert, a Jake Ferguson. I'd probably prefer Ertz than those guys, and they're going at 15, 16, 17 area. So I like Ertz as a sleeper this year, and I think the upside, surprisingly enough, is actually there for the old guy because that's Jane Daniels' second option on that offense.
Yeah, no, I do like the pick a lot for in terms of value, but I am a little worried about Ben Sinnott. I kind of am a Ben Sinnott guy, and I think he was drafted as an offensive pick. So this wasn't a blocking tight end that was taken super early and he's just elite at blocking. They intended this guy, they picked him for his offensive traits and receiving abilities. And, I don't know. I feel like maybe he gets some more work, but like we said, speculation is speculation. So right now, Zach Ertz is the number one on the depth chart, and he could eat up all those targets that he currently got last year or recently got last year. So yeah, definitely a good pick.
Yeah, I think it's just honestly. maybe not even a sleeper, more of a value here for Earths, right? Because we know his upside is going to be capped. Um, but I think there's still upside for where you are getting him in the draft, and that's why I kind of put him in this sleeper category here.
Yeah,
Um, but yeah, that'll do it for our sleepers episode here. We're coming up right on an hour. But next week we got something super exciting. We've yet to talk about it, but we're gonna do a mock draft. We're gonna do it live. And I think with Zoom, even better, we'll be able to screen share with you guys. So we'll pull it up and we'll do it with just bots. So Vinny and I will each have a team. We'll randomize it. So we're not gonna know where we're drafting right away. Um, we're gonna do no time limit. We'll talk about exactly what the setup's going to be next week. But yeah, we got a mock draft coming next week, so maybe you'll see some of these picks we've been talking about, or guys we're overlooking. We'll see how they get incorporated into these drafts. But that's going to be a super exciting episode. So I'm looking forward to it. And yeah, thank you guys for tuning in as always, and we'll see you next week.
peace everyone.